Hello everyone, it is Sideralis music, and we are back again with yet another MMC build. It's getting a little chilly in here, and I've kind of noticed that there's a little bit more light. We are actually using some shaders. This is a shader that's based off of Complementary Reimagined, I believe, and it's called Snow Imagined. It's pretty cool shader. Um, but I'm using this specific shader because we are actually going to be getting into some builds, specifically magic builds. And the first element that we're actually starting with is frost. But there's also going to be fire, and there's going to be arcane. So the frost one is called Cryomancer, and these are going to be all basically caster builds focused on mainly just casting spells. And this is going to be kind of an introduction to magic and how magic works on a combat level when it comes to MMC. Oh, and speaking of fire, in order to have this tree still here for the next video, I need to get rid of all this fire. So don't mind me just clearing out the fire to try and do what I can to save this tree and this one. It just did a thunderstorm, so that's why there's all this fire going around these trees here. But I really like these trees. They're hazelwood trees, and they just have really nice. They just have really nice logs. So anyway, and I want to, I don't want everyone asking in the next video. It's like, hey, weren't there two trees right here? It's like, well, they were, but they burned down. But so yeah, I wanted to save them. But anyways, we are gonna start out with the Cryomancer, and it's gonna be a caster build, of course, like all of these builds that we're gonna go over today. It's mainly area of effect and crowd control. That's what Frost kind of designs itself around. It's basically designed on controlling the amount of mobs. Like if you have a bunch of mobs around you, you can basically kind of slow them down so that you can get yourself in a better position. And it has a lot of area of effect stuff, so it can affect multiple mobs at once. It's also very defensive. It's not a very offensive school of magic, but Frost is usually that way in most video games, so that kind of makes sense. And if we look at our stats, for some reason, it still has my intelligence as being kind of high. Let me see if there's a reason why. It doesn't look like there's a reason why. Oh, there it is. It looks like something bugged out in the creative mode menu again. Yeah, let me just get rid of that. But basically, your build is just going to be 50 luckiness and 50 intelligence. 50 luckiness will actually get you at 55% crit chance for the spells specifically. And you can push it to beyond that with Enchants, actually. You still don't have to have a crit chance relic when it comes to magic, which is really, really good. So, and you might also, depending upon which school you go with, or if you just decide that you need less points in luckiness, you actually can go less points. You could probably go 45. Maybe you could even push 40 points in luckiness. And if that's the case and you're leveling to level 100, you would just put any points that you don't put into luckiness into intelligence. So you could end up having more points in intelligence, but this is like basically how it will go if you're building a magic build that just purely relies on magic. So each different school is going to have its set of robes. The Frost School is going to have the Frost Robe Set, and they give 25% spell power each, so that's 100% spell power, which is pretty nice. That's actually more than what Titan Shroud gives to attack damage by quite a lot, so that's pretty cool. So you end up with that 100% spell power, but you also end up with 3% spell haste specifically for this school, and I think that's very good. I think having 12% spell haste is really nice, especially considering the spell haste enchantment actually exists. And frost orbs also actually exist, which give 50% spell haste. And what that does is that there's a lot of spells that have a certain cast time to cast, and spell haste will basically just quicken that. So that's pretty nice to have, and that's what the Frost set has. That's its kind of special thing. And casting spells for this school is really fast because, like I said, crowd control. You're slowing down mobs, and being able to do that faster is pretty nice. The next armor set for the Fire School is going to be, of course, the Fire Robe Set. And the Fire Robe Set, of course, gives 25% spell power per piece. They do have a low amount of armor and a low amount of durability, but as we've seen, Enchants can take care of that, no problem. But Fire gives 2% spell critical chance per piece. So you end up with 8% spell critical chance. So you're definitely probably going to put less points into luckiness when doing Fire, which means more points for your intelligence, which means more damage. Because intelligence gives 2% spell power and 2.5% spell critical damage. The reason why intelligence gives so much less than dexterity and strength is just because spells and magic in general is just really, really strong. Magic completely goes through armor. That's like its special perk. So you're really gonna you would really want to nerf that to balance it against the other builds, which is basically what we have with intelligence. But intelligence still ends up most of the time being a better stat than the magic stats over here. However, there are a time in which you would use these magic stats, and we'll go over that a bit later in this video. But moving on to what fire does, it's also AoE like our ice school or our frost school here. But the big thing that it does is that it's mainly damage AoE, and you get a lot of self buffs when using the fire school. There's a lot of spells that do self buffs, and they stack and they combo with like other stuff. So that's mainly what fire does. All right, next we have the Arcanist, and that's gonna be the main damage school. It's it's the main damage dealer, and it's mainly single target. There's some like kind of sort of AoE stuff, but it is mainly used against I would say bosses. Even though all these schools can be used against bosses just fine, this one is like the big damage dealer for the big bosses generally. And of course, speaking of damage, this school gives plus 10% spell critical damage per piece on the robe, equaling to 40% spell critical damage. So yeah, this school is actually really nice. Just if you want to be a pure like damage dealer. So the Arcanist, Pyromancer, and Cryomancer. So on to the enchants that all the robes will be using. We have Mending, of course. You're going to want that, especially since the robes have low durability. And of course, you need a way of healing your stuff. You're going to have Life Mending, which is pretty good. But it is kind of optional. So if you do decide to take it, prioritize it after Mending, but you don't have to take it. It's kind of optional, just like all the other builds have been. Bag of Souls 3, just like all the other builds, you need to increase your experience gain so that you can level up. Very important, and it does stack on all 4 pieces of armor. That's pretty important about all these enchants. And yes, you can have Life Mending and Mending on the same piece, so go for it if you want to do that. You are going to want Protection, because again, this it's even more important that you get protection because you only have, you know, you have a very low amount of armor that these robes give you. So this enchant's pretty important, and of course when you have up to Prot 20, which is Prot 5, which you can combine books to get if you want to do it that way. Or you can do the Zenith enchanting setup, which you can craft something called the Chronicle of Shadows to learn how to advance all of that. But yeah, get at least Prot 5 on all 4 of your robe pieces. There is a structure called Mushroom Mines that drops Prot 8, and there's a structure called the Colosseum that drops Prot 10, and those will be very good for you if you do find those structures. Now, the specific magic enchant that boosts the Frost School, just like our Archer build here, is going to be Soul Frost. So it increases soul and frost spell damage you deal. Soul damage is not implemented yet, so what we're going to use it for the frost damage. It stacks. You can combine books up to Soul Frost 6, so definitely have that for your armor here. And each set is going to have all the same enchants. But Pyromancer, of course, is going to have Sunfire because that increases arcane and fire spell damage that you deal. So useful for fire. And then, of course, Arcane is also going to have Sunfire because it increases the arcane and fire spell damage you deal. And that'll be the only difference in the enchants. Next, we have Amplify Spell 5, which increases the damage and healing of critical strikes done with spells. None of your spells for these builds have healing. So you're going to be just using this to increase the critical strikes done with your spells. It just increases spell critical damage. And it does stack on all 4 pieces. So definitely very important. Spell Volatility 5, of course, increases critical strike chance done with spells. And that's why you can actually put less points into luckiness, because you can stack these all the way up. And I do find that my minimum critical chance for any build tends to be 70%. So if you find that you've hit 70%, or if you find that you're like over 70% with 15 luckiness and all 4 spell volatility 5 on all 4 pieces of your armor, then you could actually put less points out of luckiness and into intelligence. Berserker's Fury 3 is kind of optional. You're sort of like a mid-ranged caster. Your spells, while not as far as an archer can shoot, you still are kind of fighting at a range most of the time. So Berserker's Fury 3 is kind of optional, but you can take it for that resistance 3 buff that you get when you take damage. But again, it is kind of optional. But if you do get it, it only goes on the chest, and it does not go anywhere else. So, of course, it does not stack. Unbreaking 5 is really good because these have low durability. So, combined with Mending and maybe Life Mending if you choose to take it, your robes very, very likely will not break. Except for maybe on the Obsidian boss, which is very, very in-game. It's kind of the last boss you fight generally. But that's what we have the Hardening Catalyst for. It makes things unbreakable. Deflect, it can help against arrows, but Luckiness can also help against arrows. You can decide to use it. You can decide not to use it, especially with the protection enchants. But it can be good for protection against arrows. It can go on any piece of armor, but it does not stack, so only use it once. Do not put it on all 4 pieces. Just choose a piece of armor to put it on. And then, of course, if you're going to fight Archmagus, which you probably are because you are a magic user, there's Magic Protection 7. And you will get invaded by these Hexblades when you're casting a bunch of spells. And they will drop a lot of stuff that can kind of help you learn about how to get to the Glass Ocean dimension and Archmagus. They drop these, like, Hexblades, and you can also trade for a Hexblade because the trader comes. And you can kill the trader to start the Hexblade invasion, which they can drop a bunch of Spellblades and the magic effigy used to summon Magus and Archmagus. Um, but and they also drop the book that helps you. But you can also trade the trader, which is I think is called a Magister, for a Hexblade that you can have on you. And that Hexblade, as long as it's in your inventory, the Hexblade invasion won't happen. But you kind of need it to happen to get to the Glass Ocean. You need the portal to appear, and you need the Hexblade to so you can hold it, so you can right-click the portal with it to actually enter the Glass Ocean. So it's going to be fixed in a future update, but you basically hold the Hexblade in like one of your backpacks so that you can so that the Hexblades can still appear, and then you can take the Hexblade out of your backpack and then use it on the portal to go to the Glass Ocean. And there you can fight Archmagus, and you might want to use Magic Protection. In a future update, Magic Protection is actually going to be able to be combined with Protection, but currently it cannot. So you'll have to create an entirely new armor set for Magic Protection if you're going to end up using that. If you're not powerful enough to defeat Archmagus rather quickly. There is the XP game. You can use this setup. You can use this armor here if you want to, and you can use some other stuff. But the thing about it is that none of this stuff is really part of the caster build itself. So you can watch the Archer video and the Warrior video, and there are chapters, and you can skip ahead to the XP gain setup to actually view that if you want to use that to level up. Just keep in mind that you'll probably be using a different build with the XP gain setup, because none of the magic enchants will apply to the Soul Dancer robes, which basically means that you won't be able to do much damage with spells like at all. So you'll have to use a different build if you want to like heavily gain XP. But there is the Lapis backpack that you can still wear. So on to the weapons that you're going to be using. There are wands, which they only have Frostbolt. I think they can use the Spellbooks here, but I don't think they have been that utilized a whole lot. There is a future update kind of being worked on. It's kind of like a concept right now, but it's kind of being hammered out by Daedalus to help make wands a little bit better. And it'll be really cool to kind of see people maybe using builds that utilize like a shield and a wand. I could see that very well becoming a thing in the future. And the way you would actually use a shield, because you press right click to actually cast a spell, is that you would actually press Alt and right click to use a shield, and then you would let go of Alt to lower your shield so that you can press down right click to cast. And you would just, switch back and forth between that. There is the Netherite Frost Wand and the Frost Wand. The Netherite Frost Wands you'll find in the Nether are actually more powerful than this, thanks to a mod called Dungeon Difficulty, which scales loot in other dimensions. But there are some other items that I feel like are better right now. But these are kind of your first little things that can get you started in Magic if you really want to create these. And they do come with the Frostbolt spell. Now there are Frost Orbs, which I personally like, and there's, all of the schools have their variation of wands, staves, and orbs, and I really like orbs the most because they have 50% spell haste, and I do like casting spells rather fast. There are builds for staves. They more or less are designed by casting slower, but more powerful spells because they have more inherent damage on them. But I do find the Frost Orb to be, or I find orbs in general to be pretty darn good. Because you can cast spells so fast, even though they're lower damage. And then we have the staves, we have the Frost Staff, the Netherite Frost Staff, and then every single staff has a special name. For the final staff, we have the Smaragdent Frost Staff. Then we have the Ruby Fire Staff. And then we have the Crystal Arcane Staff. And we can look at how to craft those. I think you have to unlock the end for those, if I'm not mistaken. So let's just search up Crystal Arcane Staff here and see what it takes. Yeah, you need a Aeternium ingot to craft that, as well as Aurora Crystal Shards, which require the end. Let's see, what about Ruby Fire Staff? Let's see if that Sinacite, Nether Ruby. Okay, so you can actually get a Ruby Fire Staff from exploring a little bit deeper in the Nether, getting that Nether Ruby. And then I really do wonder about the Smaragdent because I haven't actually checked that one out yet. Yeah, you actually need to unlock the end. So you need to unlock the end for 2 of the staves. The Ruby Fire Staff, though, you can actually explore a little bit deeper for that Nether Ruby, which, kind of nice, I guess, for fire. So each school comes with its tomes. We have the Tome of Frost, the Frost Source, and the Frost Battle Mage's Spellbook for the Cryomancer. And then, of course, it'll be like the Tome of Fire, I think they call it Flame Source. Yeah, they call it Flame Source and Flame Battle Mage's book. And then for Arcane, Tome of Arcane, Arcane Source, and Arcane Battle Mage's book. Now we'll go over the spells of each of these. So the tomes pretty much have like your basic spells. These were kind of the ones that were first created, and then Spellblades and such mod created other spells. So for the Tome of Frost, we have Frostbolt, which is, you just launch a ball of frost. It slows the target upon impact, though, so that's part of that crowd control coming in. This is one of the only single target ones, I believe. Then we have Frost Nova. It freezes targets around you for 6 seconds, and it causes frost spell damage, which is kind of nice, and it does block their movement so they can't move. The thing is that the combo with Frost is that frozen targets actually end up vulnerable to Frost magic. And the translation for that is that the next Frost spell you cast on them is actually going to crit. And that's pretty nice for Frost, is that you can freeze enemies and then crit them. And the Frost Nova, you can freeze more enemies than one, so that's your AoE and crowd control coming into play there. And then your defensiveness coming into play, despite the slowness of the other spells, slowing mobs. You have the Frost Shield. It protects you from attacks, projectiles, and fire for 8 seconds. It slows down your movement, though, but there are ways of getting speed, which is pretty nice. So next, we are going to move on to the Frost Source. We have Glacial Barrage. We launch a barrage of icicles, and it deals frost damage per second. So that's basically, it's not really like a beam, but it's basically just a bunch of frost shards that you're, channeling outward, and it does continuous damage. I find that it can actually deal pretty decent damage for what it is. Especially casting with a Frost Orb is really nice, because you can just start casting stuff so quickly. But then we have the Arctic Winds. you enter, a sort of stance, and then you release these glacial winds expanding outwards from your location, and you deal frost damage when that happens. So that's AoE coming into play, and that is the spell I believe I'm doing in the thumbnail of this video. And I actually like that one. You can kind of run around doing that. Oh, and another big thing about the frost orbs that it doesn't say on here, but casting spells does not slow your movement when you're using an orb. So you can just kind of continue walking as per normal. I'm not sure if you can sprint or not. You might be able to. But with the stabs and wands, you cannot do that. But the frost orb does free up movement and has 50% spell haste. So that's another thing I like about the frost orb is freedom of movement. Then we have Snow Bombard. It's a channel. You can channel it to summon 3 snowballs around you. The snowballs are going to circle around you once, and then they're going to launch towards the sky, and then they will hit a random enemy in the direction that you are looking at. So that's kind of a lot of interesting mechanics coming into play. I can confirm that you're going to probably want to use this outside. You're not going to want to use this in a, let's say, a small place, like a structure with a low ceiling, because if you do, those snowballs can actually hit the ceiling and break, and you basically waste a spell. It doesn't hit it. The snowballs don't hit anything, so. But Snow Bombard can be very powerful against mobs. It's just that you cannot really use it inside certain structures. Like mine cells will be a good example of where it would be next to impossible to actually use it, and at least until you get to like Promenade, which is like kind of out in the open. But in the prisoners' quarters, no, you won't be using it in there because the ceiling is just too low. Alright, and then we have the Frost Battle Mage's Spellbook. We have Frost Overdrive, which you can perform like a Nova, which is just like a short circle of damage. Enemies around you, yeah, giving yourself a stacking attack speed buff, and it can be triggered on hit. So this is useful for like stuff like Spellblades, and a little bit later on, or in a later video, actually the next video, we're going to be going over Spellblades. So, and Spellblades, Overdrive, it's kind of its main thing. And Spellblades are essentially battle mages, so it kind of makes sense for them to have the battle mage books. But Frost Flurry, this is actually one of the only pretty good single target spells, in my opinion, for the Frost School. You project a frozen statue in a direction you're facing. It says it stops a certain distance or when it collides with something. So basically when it reaches an enemy, it'll stop, or it'll stop after like a certain distance. And then it says it deals frost damage repeatedly, but it has a really, really cool animation. It is a literal frozen statue doing like almost like this ballet pose. And then a bunch of like sword swipes happen. It's pretty cool. It's very it's very anime. So I actually really like this one a lot. And then there's Ice Storm, which I also like a lot. It's a really, really nice AoE spell. Creates icicles that orbit around you in a spiral. But not only, yeah, it does orbit around you in a spiral, and it is like 360. So they disappear after some amount of time, but it can be a really good spell to just clear out mobs around you, and just to you can just kind of run around doing Ice Storm and just killing mobs. So that one's always fun. So next I'm going to go over the weapon enchants, which I forgot to do. Actually, I should probably go over the rest of the books first. Yeah. So we have Fireball for the Tome of Fire, which launches a ball of fire. So, yeah, I think that's the same thing that these have. Yeah, Fireball. So, that's like the basic spell for fire, which is just like Frost, launch a ball of fire, launch a ball of frost. Arcane's going to have its own version of that. Frost Breath, which incinerates targets in the front. It's kind of sort of a... not Frost Breath, Fire Breath. But it's kind of like a fire... basically kind of sort of like a dragon breathing fire. Except it's more like... I think it's sort of more like a cone. But it's basically, just a continuous stream of fire. So that one's pretty cool. And then Meteor, which is pretty AoE. It crashes a meteor on the target, causing spell damage or causing fire spell damage within 6 blocks. So that's a really nice area of effect there. We have the Flame Source, which is one of the really cool books and a good book for fire damage specifically. We have Tempered Flame and Rising Flame. Those actually combine together. So first, I'm actually going to go over Rising Flames because you need Rising Flame buffs for Tempered Flame. Rising Flames, you continuously blast an enemy with fire damage that starts increasing. So you basically just hold it to continuously cast. The fire damage starts increasing every second. And the percentage is fire spell power. But the thing is, you're also stacking 5% spell haste per second. Or, per hit. So you could really build up a lot of spell haste and fire spell power, and just when you get to something that has a lot of health, you could switch to something else or switch to a different spell, and it will do an insane amount of damage. All of your stacks will go away, hence Tempered Flame, or Supernova, but yeah, it's pretty powerful. So Tempered Flame, this one's really good, and it counts as a self buff. You consume any Rising Flame buffs, which Rising Flame also counts as buffs, to make your fire spells ignore fire resistance and modifiers to generic fire damage for a duration. So that's really good against certain mobs like blazes. But it can be also really good, namely against bosses, because most bosses just have fire resistance or fire immunity. And we need fire to be kind of viable against at least the bosses. So there needs to kind of be a way for fire to bypass that. And this is kind of the way. It's this combo spell of Rising Flames and Tempered Flame. And, of course, Supernova. You charge up and release a devastating Supernova at your location. You deal fire damage to enemies in an area. I don't know if it completely consumes those stacks of Rising Flames, but I know you're not gaining those stacks anymore, and Rising Flames goes on a cooldown. So, I don't know. I think, Rising Flames and Supernova is good. Or you can do Rising Flames and Tempered Flame, but you just have to keep in mind that your fire spells ignore fire resistance when doing Tempered Flame. So Supernova is not going to be as crazy because all your stacks went away, but at least it'll be able to do some damage. So that's kind of the balance there. And then, of course, we have the Battle Mage version of the Fire School. We have Flame Overdrive, which is exactly like Frost Overdrive. We have Scorching Wind, though, which is actually one of my favorites. You just launch a sphere of fiery air in the direction you're looking, and then enemies that are caught in it will actually be carried away, as well as taking damage while being caught in that fiery sphere of air. So that one's really cool. And then we have Flickering Flame, which is probably the coolest ability. One of the coolest abilities in the game. It says, teleport to the nearest enemy. You strike them repeatedly for 1 times your melee DPS. if they are the only enemy nearby. If there are more enemies nearby, you teleport to all of them equally. So you could see yourself just going back and forth, like this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and like really, really fast. So it looks very cool. It does look very anime. Um, and then for on hit effects like Flame Overdrive, you're going to get a debuff of 0.2 times modifier. But I think that's okay. Um, and it is kind of designed to be used with Spellblades. But I could see it being used with like staves and stuff just because they do have an inherent attack damage and the fire orb as well. So, yeah. Then we finally have the arcane spells. We have Tome of Arcane, Arcane Missile. Yeah, shoots a bolt of energy. It shoots an arcane bolt. That's pretty much, classic. A classic spell. We have the Arcane Blast, which kind of just shortly blasts the target. Like they get these purple particles that appear on them, indicating that they have been blasted with arcane damage. But when you do that, it grants arcane power. And this arcane power stacks up to 3 times. And then you can channel an arcane beam, which is basically just a giant laser of energy. And it consumes the arcane power stacks. But it's basically like a Kamehameha wave. I mean, it's pretty insane. I think a lot of people will like that spell. Next, we have Arcane Source, which is Magic Missile is actually going to get updated to be like even cooler in the future. So that's something to look forward to. But right now, what we have is we shoot a projectile that actually will split into 3 homing projectiles, which mean they lock on. And they choose the 3 closest enemies if there's no target that you chose yourself. And then they'll deal arcane damage to each of those enemies. So that's a pretty cool spell to have. It's pretty handy. That's sort of kind of AoE. It can do single target or, hit multiple enemies. So Amethyst Rain, kind of the same thing. It'll hit one enemy, and if that enemy dies, it'll hit the other enemy. They home into the nearest enemy, but it's one of the really cool looking abilities, and I think it's also very cool sounding. You launch 4 amethysts into the air, so like the amethyst shards, they like slow down to a halt, and they'll like do like a flip, and then they'll lock on to whichever enemies are nearby. So I really like that. I like that a lot. And then we have Sonic Boom, which is just a super, super powerful spell. Now I basically have no stats right now because I have no armor, no enchants, no relics. So of course, these spells are going to be at very, very low damage. But when you do have all that other stuff that I just mentioned, they'll be at a very high damage and they'll show what they do. But Sonic Boom is basically like the Warden's Sonic Shriek, but it doesn't go through walls, and you can't really see mobs through walls with it. But you basically unleash a Sonic Boom that's in the direction that you're facing or targeting, and it's gonna deal damage to enemies in a straight line. So multiple enemies can be hit, or it can, just devastate one enemy. And then, of course, we have the Battle Mage Spellbook with the Overdrive ability, just arcane version. But we have a thing called Arcane Twin Slash, which you're going to have these swords appear that slash around you at a location, but they're also going to go to a targeted location and slash around you. So I think that's pretty cool. That's kind of like pseudo AoE. It does technically hit multiple mobs. It's just not in like a specific like square or circle, like specific shape. So, and then the Ender's Gaze, which is actually a pretty interesting spell. You shoot a basically slow moving Ender Pearl. First enemy hit, gonna gain 5 rotating Ender Eyes for 4 seconds. So you're gonna see these Ender Eyes rotating around an enemy. and they rotate for 4 seconds, and they deal arcane damage pretty quickly. And if that enemy dies, those eyes are going to detach from the enemy. They're going to refresh that 4 seconds, meaning that they can find, like, they're going to find a new host if there's like another enemy nearby, and then that 4 seconds happens again where they do damage around that enemy. So you can actually clear out a lot of mobs with that. It's just you're clearing them out one at a time, so that's kind of like pseudo AoE. But yeah, it's pretty fun. I like a lot, pretty much all the spells. I don't really have complaints about any of them. There's only small improvements here and there, like the wands could be slightly improved. I think the spells themselves are going to get a little bit buffed in the future, either the spells or the some of the items like the Frost Orb. Just because casters aren't quite as strong as some of the other magic builds. Like if you want to purely cast with Spellblades, which would essentially make you a spell sword, it would be stronger than casting with like any of these, really. But yeah, just to mention that, you know, we're gonna get some updates in the future where I believe at least these will be better, if not these items here. So onto the enchants that you'll use for these weapons. It's pretty simple. You're going to be using Spell Infinity and Life Mending, just because Mending and Spell Infinity are incompatible. Life Mending will be used to heal your weapon, so that you can have Spell Infinity, so that you don't need runes to cast. But you can craft a wizard villager with a rune crafting altar. Yeah. With a rune crafting altar, you can make a wizard villager, which can actually sell you runes for cheap. 2 emeralds for like 8 runes, which can be quite good. Just because it's very, very easy to get emeralds. And then next you have Spell Haste, which increases the casting speed of your spells. It doesn't increase the cooldown when they go on cooldown, but it increases the casting speed of the spells. So when you're holding right click waiting for that spell to go off, you have to wait a little bit less. So, and all of these of course can have that. And then Spell Power is their main damage enchant. It's kind of like Sharpness, but for spells. I think it's probably overall a little bit better than Sharpness. But yeah, these are pretty much all the enchants that these are going to take. And another reason why, the big reason, at least in this mod pack, why stuff like Spellblades and whatnot are just like way better at casting spells, is because enchants like Enigma Resonator and Void Strike, like the really powerful ones, actually the ones that can go on weapons like swords and stuff like that, they actually affect spells. And that's why casting with those is actually so much more powerful than casting with these. But these are still really good for mobs. You still can beat bosses with these, and it kind of serves as an introduction to spellcasting. So, onto the relics. You're going to want intelligence, percent intelligence. 50 is the max you can get, so this one will be crazy good. Not only that, it's also giving us some extra spell critical damage, so this is probably one of the best relics that we could actually ask for. So, but percent intelligence is what you want. I would do like 30 or greater on percent intelligence. And then, of course, that one's 43. That one's 47. And then, this one is 41, and this one is giving me 33. So this one will be probably like a bare minimum one for me. But this is also another one I wanted to mention, and this is where the other stats would actually come into play, the one on the magic tab. is if you had something that gave you a specific element spell power, so like Frost, Fire, or Arcane, you have 30 or above, and you're also getting like maybe 100% or above spell critical damage on that. And if you find 5 of those, if you find like 4 or 5 of those, you could actually use these stats here because they actually give you flat spell power. So you actually get more spell power out of these stats than you do intelligence. But the reason why intelligence is so good is because you get that spell critical damage along with it. So you would actually need to get really lucky and find relics like this and find like 4 or 5 of those before you can actually start using those stats, is what I would say. Because I have tested all of these stats like against each other and all the combinations, and that's kind of the conclusion I came to, is that intelligence is probably going to be best unless you get really lucky and find 4 or 5 of these. So, yep. And then you can affix these relics to the chest and the head armors or the robes of your set. And you do that in the smithing table. There is no leg or boots, and you can affix it once. You can only do it once. It cannot be undone, and it cannot be overwritten by another relic. So be very careful doing that. But you could also wear these relics as well, and you can enchant them. So there's that. There's good backpacks like Blaze, giving you immunity to fall damage, and the fireballs by blazes. Immunity to fire for the magma cube. Bat Traveler's backpack, which is nice because of night vision, and you can find it in mine shafts. There's also the mushroom mines structure that you can find it in. We have the Squid Traveler's backpack, which grants water breathing and night vision when being in the water, and then of course the Lapis one, which has chance to multiply the amount of experience, which is pretty nice. There's not many like artifacts or anything that you can use to kind of buff yourself, so we can kind of go straight to Trinkets. The Hardening Catalyst, of course, you apply it in an anvil, you can make anything unbreakable. That's really nice to have. We have the Icarus Wings, which I have a set here. I have them agglomerated, which you can create something called an empty agglomeration, which you can combine 2 trinkets together. I have these wings agglomerated, and I can just I can wear this armor, and I can press Control W, and I can just take off with these wings. I don't need fireworks or any boost, which is actually kind of nice. Yep, Control W. And I just kind of take off with my wings. I don't really need anything else. So that's actually kind of nice. And then that's going to be with all the robes, just because your armor isn't heavy enough to weigh the wings down. So that's one really nice thing about robes, is that they're super light. Then we have the Charm of Absorption 4. It gives you 8 extra hearts, and that constantly refreshes. So that's something to wear, and you can put Hardening Catalyst on that. It also has durability, so it can be affected by Unbreaking, Life Mending, and Mending. So you can use that and put it in the charm slot. There's the Broken Watch, which makes effects durations last like 50% longer, like status effect durations. I think that's really good to have, especially for different builds. It'd be really good on fire for when you're like getting all these stacking buffs. There's the Monocle, which grants permanent night vision. So you wouldn't have to even wear that anymore. You could switch to another backpack to wear constantly. And have your other backpacks that you can switch out and use for storage. And then, of course, there's the Empty Agglomeration, combining 2 trinkets that share the same slot, which you cannot do that with 2 relics from Relic X, but you can do that with like wings. You can do it with stuff that goes in the glove slot, because there's other like trinkets and stuff that you can wear that I think are personally less important, but you know, they're fun to have. So, yep, that I think that about does it for Magic. There's not really anything crazy as far as like this introduction to it. The next build, though, we're going to be going over these Battle Mage builds here, and I'll be talking about how you can just cast spells and how you can do these stats just for casting spells, which will basically make you a spell sword instead of a battle mage, because that just means you prefer casting spells more. And I'll be going over another way that these stats can actually come into play with a specific build. If you were to use a specific enchant, that would probably end up making these stats actually better to use. So that about wraps it up, and I'll see you guys in the next one.